Palm Springs, my first husband, the married man, and Christmas in Washington, D.C. Grandma's porch, a place to relax, a place to enjoy. Come visit Grandma's porch. Palm Springs, my first marriage, the married man, and Christmas in Washington, D.C. Hello, y'all. I'm Diana Brienne. Well, you know I like to do short videos, but periodically I do a longer video and I tell stories from my life, either about people that I've known, which I don't ever disclose identity. Sometimes I'll change the names or the locations. But in this one, this is about me. So for the most part, I can give most of the details, but I probably will change some names or whatever in here. So anyhow, I got to thinking about Palm Springs and when I first moved to Palm Springs. Well, I'm going to pull up a chair here, and that may make it a little bit easier for me to tell my story. So years ago, I was in my early 20s, and I had been in LA, and I had had a relationship of long-standing with whom I called Young Doctor in Love, who was a young intern resident, and he and I had had a long-term relationship. But for a number of reasons, I wanted to break up, and I was still young, and he was young too. He was about 3 years older than me. And so off I went, and I picked up and left and moved away from my beach apartment that I had. And I think I went to Texas for a while, and then that didn't work out. Well, it worked out, but I just decided not to stay. And then I ended up going back to my mother, where my mother was living at the time, and then we ended up driving back towards California. I was going to go back to my job in LA, but on my way to LA, there was a big, huge ice storm. And so my mom and I had to detour down through a couple different states that we were not going to go through. And in turn, we went a different route. And we were driving right past Palm Springs. And I had a girlfriend whom I had gone to at the same time. We'd both been going to college, and I knew out there, but I didn't let her know, that I was on, my way back to California or anything like that. And so my mom and I decided to drive through the Palm Springs area, and we stopped at one of those welcome centers, and I said, "Hey, are there any apartments around here for rent?" And the lady said, "Yes, there's a beautiful complex just right over there." So my mom and I went over, we looked at the apartment, and believe it or not, I ended up renting an apartment. So now, instead of going directly back to LA, I've rented an apartment in the Palm Springs area. A beautiful apartment, and it was around Christmas time, and the weather had been really icy coming across country. I remember that. And so we had to wait on my furniture to be delivered because it had been put in storage prior to my leaving California the first time. And so there, my mother and I had moved into this apartment. It was my apartment, but she had moved in with me, to kind of help me out. And later my furniture came. I got a job out there, but then I picked right back up with the job I had in LA. So I was commuting into LA, which was about 2.5 hours away. And not every day, about 3 days a week, I would go in. And I had a wonderful job in LA, so I'd reconnected with that wonderful job. Now I was living in Palm Springs area. And then I met a very handsome guy, and we started dating, and I fell kind of head over heels with him, and he fell head over heels with me. And yet he was kind of manipulative at some level. And so I got kind of fed up with that, and I kind of broke it off. Well, he didn't like that I broke it off. But I broke it off, and during that time that I broke off, I went to the airport and to pick up my mother because she had flown away somewhere, and then she came back. And as I was standing there, and I remember exactly what I was wearing white corduroy pants and a white sweater, a short sleeve sweater. And this man, I noticed, got off the plane around the same time that my mother did. Now, the planes back then, they actually pulled right up next to the runway, and people walked down from those planes when they got off. And the Palm Springs airport at that time was very, very small. Remember, this is in the 80s. And so I noticed this man kind of watching me, very handsome man, a business type man, and he was kind of watching me. And so when we went to the luggage department, we were standing there. My mother and my girlfriend had showed up there at the same time, and we were standing there waiting for my mother's luggage, and he happened to come over and start talking to my mom and to my girlfriend. But I knew he was interested in talking to me, but he didn't come right up and approach me at first. He was a few years older than me. And, well, more than a few, but he, was still young, because I was young. But anyhow, he handed me his card and told me to call him anytime if I wanted to go to dinner. Well, I was really smitten by him. I really thought, wow, he's so good looking. So when I got back home, after I dropped my mom off, I called him. And he said, yeah, let's go to dinner tonight. And so I said, okay. My mom was like panicking. How can you leave me? I just got back. I said, well, Mom, let me go to dinner and then I'll be back. I think she was more worried about me because I didn't know him, and probably for good reason. Anyhow, we went to dinner. He took me to a very, very nice restaurant, and I didn't kiss him or anything like that. I was always kind of the hard to get one. Well, I asked him if he was divorced, and he said yes, he was divorced. And so lo and behold, he lived only part-time in Palm Springs. He was a builder, real estate developer. And so we started dating. Whenever he came into town, we started dating, and I really, really liked him. And almost right away, he talked marriage and wanted to get married. And of course, I was very young and kind of naive and everything, and all excited and entranced by this very handsome man. And he wined me and dined me, and we started taking trips together. And then he bought me a beautiful engagement ring, and we stayed at, I think it was called the Bellage Hotel in Beverly Hills. And it was wonderful. It was magical. It was exciting. It was everything I was kind of dreaming of. I just come out of a long-term relationship, and then I came out of another relationship, and now I thought I met the man of my dreams. And so on a very, very windy night, the day before Valentine's Day, we drove on Friday the 13th, mind you. It was very windy. We drove to Las Vegas to get married. Okay. And as we're driving to Las Vegas, I remember looking at the lights as we're coming up above the hill towards Las Vegas. Because back then, there was like a 3-day wait to get married, and you could go to Vegas and there was no wait. And it was open 24 hours a day to get your marriage license. And Vegas at that time was just a strip. And wasn't the huge city that it is today. And so we ended up getting to Vegas. We checked into this gorgeous hotel suite that a friend of his provided for us, and who owned the hotel, which was amazing. So anyhow, we walk over to the courthouse at it was like midnight. So it was actually February 14th now, because he said, well, let's get married on Friday the 13th. I said, no way, I'm not getting married on Friday the 13th. And so we got our license on the 14th, and it was amazing. So we took our license over to the Justice of the Peace there, and we had scheduled a wedding at, I think it was called Little Chapel of the West, the next day, but he wanted to get married right away. And so we went to the Justice of the Peace, which was open all night, and the Justice of the Peace had the same last name as my maiden name. And I was really kind of, wow, this is something. And so I went into the bathroom and I kind of waited and I waited and I kind of thought about this. And I remember that I had a beautiful silk yellow pantsuit on that had been given to one of my dear friends who gave it to me, who had been from a very famous movie star, had worn it. And so I had this outfit on and I went back and we did get married. We got married at that time. Well, the next day my mom showed up for the wedding that we were going to have at the little chapel that we didn't end up having, but we still went over there and got photos and everything. One of my best girlfriends showed up and we all went to dinner, and it was a beautiful dinner with violins playing and just beautiful food and some kind of gourmet area. And we had a wonderful time. Okay. But over the next months, I were to find out a lot of different things. I would find out that when we had met, he had not been fully divorced. And I would find out that he had business dealings that had gotten tied up with his former wife, and she was mad. She was mad because they had been married a long time. They had kids together, and I mean, it was a very complicated relationship that they had. That as a young person, naive as I was, walking into this marriage. Now, I'm not saying he deceived me. I'm just saying that I don't think he was fully upright with everything. And so nonetheless, he, maybe I didn't tell him all the details of my life either. I'd had a long-term relationship prior to him, and I really didn't go into all those details. So perhaps it was a little bit of both of us, but I was doing everything right, and I was going into the marriage with all the right reasons and all the right things, and I think he was too. But what I realized after we were married was that his children, and as they should, meant a tremendous deal to him. And the children were feeling pulled apart by our marriage and his divorce to the wife. And I understand that. And I think that he kind of deceived his previous wife at some level. I'm not saying that she wasn't at fault at certain levels. I don't really know all the ins and outs of that relationship, because that wasn't my relationship. I'm sure she had her side to it and he had his side to it. But he loved his kids. And gradually, it was as if the kids were pulling away from him in order to get him to go back to the first wife. And I was young. I didn't know what to do. I loved him. We had bought a house in Palm Springs. It was a beautiful home. And but it was kind of a home that had been built, and the previous owners had taken off. The husband had taken off, and long story short, he was found in another state, supposedly had taken money from what I understood, from some kind of company and all kinds of things like that. So the house had sort of a negativity from the past over it. And I remember it being kind of a cold, isolated house in Palm Springs, as some of them are. Some of the streets are very, very private, and this one was very private. And so our marriage began to gradually go downhill. We traveled a lot. I remember towards the end, we went to Hawaii. We weren't married all that long, okay? It was a shorter term marriage, but it was long enough. And I remember going to Hawaii with him and hearing the song, The Lady in Red, as we sat outside at this beautiful restaurant. And we were the only ones in that restaurant. It was really, really interesting, but it was a beautiful night and overlooking the ocean. And I remember crying because I knew our relationship was over. I really knew it was over. I really knew that it was over. And so we went back to Palm Springs, and things just began to go downhill. He was torn apart because that first wife was putting holds on certain business dealings, and there was just so much, business that was going sideways and backwards and downwards. And that I believe, and I don't know this to be true, but I believe that he wanted to go back to the first wife because of the children and because of the business dealings. And it was just too much. He'd been married too long, and it was too much for him to break off and break up his family, that I really didn't know that that's what was really going on when I entered into all of this. I thought he was kind of free and clear. And so I believe that he went back, and there was a lot of events that took place and a lot of back and forth movement on our part, but he's told me to go to over to visit one of my girlfriends. And so I went to go over to visit one of my girlfriends, but she wasn't home. So I got back home early, and as I'm pulling in, he's pulling out. And he had a Mercedes, and I remember this. And he was pulling out, and I said, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" And he said, "I love you, but I'm leaving you." And I didn't know what was going on. I was devastated. I was crushed. I was confused. So I started chasing, as he's pulling out, I started chasing his car down our street. And of course, he took off. But every 5 or 10 minutes, he would call me. He would constantly call me. And then he'd hang up and then call me again. He went to his son's, who was living in Newport Beach at the time, and stayed there. And then the next few weeks or a few months were kind of blurry. He would call, and then he wouldn't call, and then he'd call. And I stayed in the house. Went back to work in LA. I was scared in the house because suddenly the air conditionings went out. And at that point, it was high summer, and it was very, very hot. And the only way that I could stay cool was to open up the windows at night. And I didn't want to do that because this neighborhood was very isolated and very private. And so it was so hot. And we had a security system, and only I knew that security code because I changed the security password. Well, lo and behold, one day I went to go over to Kmart to get some electric hair curlers because mine had broken. And I was gone for maybe 20, 25 minutes. And when I came back, the security system had been turned off. And I went in the house, and I had noticed something very distinct. We had like a little alcove area, and prior to our marriage, I had these 4 huge glass gold embossed mirrors. And I think it was 3 of them were missing, and 1 of them was still up on the wall, but had a crack all down the middle of it, like someone was trying to take it off and couldn't get it off. And it just scared me. And the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was him. And I said to him, "I'm getting out of this house. There's something really spooky going on here." And so I hung up, and I took off. I grabbed my clothes, I grabbed my purse, and I took off. And I never really went back there to stay overnight again. But it was as if someone was setting me up to scare me to leave. And so I left. I went over and I stayed with my girlfriend, and I stayed with her. And so I went into LA to work, and it was 2.5 hours away, but I left. I ended up calling in on my way, and I turned around and went back to Palm Springs because I knew something was up. And he kind of knew my schedule, and I decided to go past the house on my way back to my girlfriend's. And as I went, there was a moving van loading up everything in the moving van, including everything that I had brought into the marriage. And so basically, he had his relatives come and take everything. And so now I ended up with nothing, no furniture, no nothing. And I really couldn't get a hold of him. So a few months later, and a lot of confusion and moving about and getting my own place again, and starting off with rental furniture and everything like that, he contacted me, and he wanted to get together. And of course, I was still madly in love. And so we got together, and we went back together. And we went back together, and we broke up, and we went back together, and we broke up, and we went back together and broke up, and we went back together and broke up. It was a back and forth movement constantly. Finally, I reached a point where I said, no more back and forth. I'm done. I'm completely done. And I broke it off. I completely broke it off. And we ended up getting a divorce. And it was later, I believe. No, it was prior to the divorce that we got together one more time. And we met in Santa Barbara. He was living up north of California, and I was coming from Palm Springs. So we met in Santa Barbara at the Red Lion Hotel there. And we spent our time together. And I knew that that was going to be our last time, even though he was extremely hopeful that we were going back together. And so when we made our separation that morning, he was going to the left on the freeway and I was going to the right. I looked back and I said, this is going to be the last time I see you. To myself, I said that to him. And it was. He called me after that, and I think we had these plans to get together, and then suddenly he started becoming very arrogant. And I just said, this is it. And I broke it off completely. And I don't even know if we ever really talked after that. We might have talked once or twice, but that was it. So we got divorced, we went our separate ways, and our lives went on. I was crushed. It took me a long time to get over him. And so I began dating again. And, the worst time to date is when you have a broken heart, I think. And so this is where the married man comes in, okay? So I meet this man. I'm out at this gorgeous disco type of place. And he'd come in on business. He was not that much older than me, but a few years, extremely handsome. And he traveled a lot. And he was smitten with me too. And I was young, and I have to say, I had it going on. I was in my 20s, and I'm 63 now. And so he just started calling me, and he, long story short, began to fly me places. And I never really thought that he was ever married. I never really dawned on me, because you got to remember, I was in my 20s. And even though I can't come out of this one relationship, I still was never a suspicious person. And so we began to travel. He would fly me to all these different resorts and different places. And I should have known early on that something was up, but I really didn't. And I remember he was so in love with me. It took my mind off of everything that I was going through at the time. And so we would fly here, we would fly there. He would meet me. He would send me a plane ticket, and I would fly. And I remember one time, this was the one time. This was probably the last time I saw him, because I realized at that point he was married. So I'd gotten off the plane in Washington, D.C., and he met me there, and he was so excited, but it kind of kept his distance, because he said, for whatever reason, we needed to kind of publicly space ourselves. I never really understood why, but we did. So he put me up at the Mayflower Hotel, which was gorgeous, in this beautiful, beautiful suite. And it was just beautiful. And it was at Christmas time, and there was a Christmas tree lighting. And so he said to me, now, when we go to the Christmas tree lighting, we can't be together. Well, why not? Why can't we be together? Well, we just can't. So I remember going to the Christmas tree lighting, and it was beautiful. Oh my gosh, it was just magnificent at Christmas time. And I was way over there, and he would look at me, and I had a great area to see the Christmas tree lighting. But I couldn't talk to him, and I couldn't understand why I could not talk to him. So we went back to the beautiful hotel suite, and he said to me, I said to him, I don't know why I said this. I said, are you married? And he paused, and he said, yes. I was crushed. I was devastated. I'd just come out of a divorce, and now here I am with a married man. I did not know he was married. I had no idea that he was married. And so I said, well, we can't have a relationship. We can't have anything. You're married. He said, no, no, no. I will leave my wife and we will get married. I said, I can't do that. You are married to another woman. I don't want you. I don't want you. I was sort of in love, but not completely. Something I had held back. Some part of me had held back in this relationship, and it must have been my spirit, my subconscious, somehow maybe knew something, but I had held back. And I said, absolutely not. I said, put me on the plane. I want to go back. He said, no, I want you to stay here for Christmas and we'll go back and forth. I said, no, put me on that plane. I got back on the plane. I went back to California, and I wouldn't have anything to do with him. So long story short, at some point I moved to Newport Beach, and that's a whole nother video, and I think I've done a video on that. I moved to Newport Beach, and he called me, and he said he was going to be in LA. He said, please meet me, at least to say goodbye. And I said, okay, I'll meet you to say goodbye. So because of the situation, we couldn't meet in public. And so I met him in private at his hotel room. And he said, you know, he was crushed. It had been the worst time of his life. He didn't want to live anymore because if I couldn't be a part of his life, he just didn't want to live. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, or no, he said he didn't want to live. He had gone through a period of time where he didn't want to live, but he was okay now, I think. But he was kind of agitated at me that I would not go back into the relationship with him. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. And it was really, really nasty to him verbally. You know, I mean, in the sense of just telling him what a creep he was to do this to his family. And then that was it. I walked out and I left. And then later I met my husband, and this is a couple years later. Somehow we were living in Europe, and somehow he got my telephone number in Europe, and he called me. I don't know how he got my telephone number, but he did, and I was married, and he asked me to meet him. And I said, sure, I'll meet you, but I'm going to bring my husband with me too. Is that okay? That was the last phone call we ever had, the last phone call. So that is my long-winded short version of my journey of my first marriage. And I'm sure I'm leaving out all kinds of details and you know, but sometimes these videos get too long. And when they get too long like that, I try to consolidate them. But, you know, as far as, you know, relationships, I learned a lot from those relationships. And so when I met my husband, I learned a lot from those relationships. And when I met my husband, oh my gosh, you know, I'm so grateful for my husband. I love him, and he's truly the love of my life. You know, I'm not sure exactly what happened to my first husband. You know, you might say, I have an idea, but I don't want to say, but I don't know exactly what happened to him. And he was actually a really good guy. He really was. And I think my first husband and I learned a lot from that marriage. And I think that it's so important when you enter a relationship that you're totally honest and totally upfront, because it's all going to come out anyhow. And I probably could have been a little bit more transparent, or maybe even a lot more, you know, but I was young. And he most certainly could have been a lot more transparent. And with the married man, I think that, you know, to this day, honestly, I think he watches my videos. I have no idea, because I've never heard from him since that time in Europe, and that's been 25 years ago. But it wouldn't surprise me that he watches my videos and he watches my social media. It would not surprise me, because he truly did love me. He truly, you know, I often say the man that loved me the most in life was that married man. I don't know why, but I think he did. I think he truly was willing to sacrifice everything for me, and I was not willing to break up someone else's home, because what you give out comes back, and I didn't want that, and I wasn't going to take someone who was married and marry them. And I wasn't going to do that. I was not going to do that. I was not going to be a home wrecker, and I was not going to wreck someone else's marriage. And so I'm so glad that I made that decision, because God blessed me afterward with the most amazing husband. And so I'd come on here and I do these little stories, but I thought I would share with you, because I was very young, and I'd come out of relationship with young doctor in love, and I've done videos on that, at least I think on some area of my social media. And he was just a young, handsome doctor, and we were young together, and I was in my early 20s, and that was my LA time, and we broke up, and then I met the real estate developer who, like I said, was really truly a good guy. I think he was really truly a good guy going through, I think he was in an unhappy marriage, and a very unhappy marriage. I think it had gone south for many years, and I think I was kind of the catalyst to get him out of there. And but it was more than he could handle, because he loved his children. He was a great dad, and he had 5 children, and he loved his children. And I got that because I love my kids. And I can tell you, if it came to deciding on a relationship or my kids, I would choose my kids. That's me. And so his kids, it was pulling him apart, and that's what initially broke us up in that marriage. So I think he did the right thing, because, well, both of our lives went on, and I think he remarried a couple times after me, or at least once, and I think he actually had more children, I'm not sure. And of course, my life went on. I'm happily married for about 30 years, and beautiful children, and a wonderful life. So I think we were meant to come into each other's lives. Perhaps I was supposed to be the catalyst that pulled him away from a marriage that he considered extremely dysfunctional, his other marriage. And I think with the married man, I think he was a very, very good man. I really do. I know you say, oh, how could he be a good man if he was married? I think he was a good man, and I don't think he had ever cheated with anybody prior to me. And so, I think going with a married person is wrong, in my opinion. And so I walked away, and it was difficult to walk away, because I was still in a vulnerable time. I needed that emotional support that he was giving me, but I went it alone. I did not want to be with a married man, and so I walked away. And so that was my story. And I think the one lesson that I have learned is that if you find out someone's married, don't get involved with them. That's my opinion. And I learned that. And if you are married, don't deceive someone and pretend that you're not married. And tell them the truth. And the best thing is to focus on your marriage that you have. If you give that energy to the relationship you have, you're likely not going to go out looking for anybody else. And so that's my story, and one of my stories in my life. And that was in my 20s and Palm Springs. So from my house to yours, may God bless you. And I hope to talk to you soon again. And from my beautiful, beautiful day here on Grandma's porch, I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye. To relax and a place to enjoy. Grandma's porch.